Hey everybody, welcome to the Mana Leak. I'm John as always, and it's that time of the year again. It's set review time. We have Kaladesh coming out in pre-release in just over 1 week, and then of course full release 1 week after that. So it's time to take a look at all of the cards in the set, and we're going to start today with white. Now, as usual, there are 3 gigantic disclaimers on this video. Number 1 is arguably the single most important one. This is a limited set review. I'm talking about sealed, I'm talking about draft. I am not talking about standard or legacy or vintage or modern or EDH or two-headed giant or tiny leaders or Canadian Highlander or anything like that. If I disparage a card that you think is going to be a $100 card because it breaks open a vintage deck, that's not what this review is for. This review is going to talk about 40 card decks in limited, draft, sealed only. Number 2, I haven't played with these cards. Except for the reprints, I've played with some of those, but the actual new cards I've never played with. I've never played this format. I haven't printed out proxies or anything like that. So my reviews, as everybody's reviews are, leading up to pre-release, simply my raw card evaluation skills based on my previous experience with Magic cards in various sets. So my ratings will change. Most of you who have seen my videos before know that I do a top 10 cards that I was wrong about series at the end of the set, and there are always at least 10 cards that I'm wrong about. So this is just sort of my first glance, my first look, my impressions on how the set's going to work and how the cards are going into pre-release and going into my very first draft. But this is the best we have to start with anyways. Finally, disclaimer number 3, this is my opinion. These are how I rate the cards. Absolutely, there are some cards here and there that I prefer more or that I dislike more than some other people will. And so maybe you'll grade thing, a half step higher or maybe a full grade higher. These are simply my opinions. One of the worst things that Magic players can do is get into the habit of saying, well, Pro X said this, so that's correct. That's not how it works. Take a look at Blood Mist recently. 50% of well-known, well-respected pros said that Blood Mist was an amazing card. 50% of well-known, well-respected pros said that Blood Mist was a terrible card. Who was right? I don't know. I have my opinions on that, and I'm sure you've all heard that if you've watched my previous videos, but people can be wrong. People can have different opinions, and so I want to hear yours as well. Don't take my opinions as being the absolute truth on these cards, because it's not. It's my opinion. The thing that I love about set reviews are that they encourage discussion about the cards. We talk together about the cards, and we learn from each other. So don't just take this as the absolute truth, and also don't just assume that I'm wrong. Down in the comments below, you can let me know what you disagree with, what you agree with, what I've missed, what you've missed, etc. Let me know in the comments down there. But that's enough for disclaimers. Let's get to the actual cards. Up first, we have Acrobatic Maneuver. Acrobatic Maneuver is 2 and a white for an instant at common. Exile target creature you control, then return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. Draw a card. So I overrated Long Road Home in Shadows over Innistrad, and this card's pretty similar. Trading a +1/+1 counter for a card in exchange is probably on the same power level, except this one costs 1 more. Long Road Home was 1 and a white. Now this is common compared to Long Road Home's uncommon status. It will probably suffer the same fate as Long Road Home unless there's some insane enter the battlefield effects at common or uncommon that you can really abuse. There are some out there. There's the gold Muldrifter and things like that will be something that you would be happy flickering. But I don't really know if this is something that you're super going to want to play. Cloud Shift never really saw a whole lot of play in Abyss and Restore days, and I don't think this is going to be super playable either. I think it's pretty cuttable in most decks, so I'm going to start with a C-. Up next is Aerial Responder. Aerial Responder is 1 white for a creature Dwarf Soldier at uncommon. It's a 2/3. It has Flying, Vigilance, and Lifelink. So dwarves are a new race. Well, not a new race. They existed way back when in Magic's history, but they are back finally, and they are the white-red race in Kaladesh. And there are some dwarf synergies. There's a dwarf lord, etc. So that's a bonus right there. This does seem pretty solid anyways. It's a 2/3 flyer for 3, which is already something that I'd be kind of interested in. The white is definitely a downside, but it's not too bad, especially if you're heavy white. Getting Vigilance and Lifelink tacked onto it, though, is totally worth it. I'm not totally sure where I take this exactly. I don't think it's ever a first pick, but I think it's something that you'll be pretty happy to see in your first kind of third of your picks, and that you'll be happy to play as long as you're solidly in white. I'm willing to start at a C+ for Aerial Responder. Alright, let's get away from commons and uncommons. We've got our first rare here, Aetherstorm Rock. This is a 2 white creature bird. It's a 3/3. It has flying, and whenever Aetherstorm Rock or another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you get weird little lightning bolt thingy, which is an energy counter. I'll talk about that in a second. Whenever Aetherstorm Rock attacks, you may pay energy. If you do, put a +1/+1 counter on it and tap up to 1 target creature defending player controls. So energy is a new mechanic in Kaladesh. There will be a number of cards, a large number of them, that say you get energy, or you get energy, or energy. And basically a counter is put on you, just like an infect counter is put on you, or an experience counter is put on you from the new commander set. And then those counters can be used for the card that made them, or any other card. Any card that requires energy, you can spend the energy that you personally have. So this is a pretty interesting one. A 3/3 flyer for 4 is something that I'm already totally in on. A decent pickup right then and there. Getting at least 1 energy, and ideally more, assuming that it doesn't snap die, is a very good deal indeed. Even if you're only using it on the rock and not anything else, but hopefully you'll have some other things to do with it. You will need to land at least 1 more creature to get kind of our first activation out of this rock, because you do need 2 energy. But if you do, you're left with a 4/4 flyer that taps something down, and then from then on, every second creature nets you another counter, and that's the worst case scenario. If you do have other cards that produce more energy, you can make this a 5/5 on the next turn, and a 6/6 on the next turn. And by that point, you probably just should win the game. It seems like it is just shy of bomb territory. You do have to take time to build it up, and you do need some other cards to get it to build up. So I'm not quite going to put it into bomb territory, but I'm pretty happy giving it a B+. I think it's probably first pickable against all but the absolute best of removal. I think you'll be pretty happy to have this card. 4 mana 3/3 I'm already in. All the extra stuff, B+ for sure. Well, we may as well continue up the rarity scale and go on to a mythic. Angel of Invention is next. It's 3 white for a creature angel at mythic. It's a 2/1, flying, vigilance, lifelink. Other creatures you control get +1/+1, and it has Fabricate 2. Fabricate is a new mechanic in Kaladesh. Fabricate says when this creature enters the battlefield, put X +1/+1 counters on it, or create X 1/1 colorless servo artifact creature tokens. So there's a lot going on here, actually. It's a 5 mana 2/1 flying vigilance lifeline that comes with 2 2/2s, because of course they're 1/1s with +1/+1. And that's totally playable. Plus it's making your other creatures bigger too. Totally awesome. Or, throwing that all aside, we could get a 5 mana 4/3 vigilance lifelinker flyer that makes the rest of our creatures bigger. Also really good. The versatility on this and on many of the Fabricate creatures is just bonkers. I think both choices are really valid given the circumstances that you're in. Sometimes you'll want to go wide, sometimes you'll want to just have a giant friggin' flyer. I think this is a snap pick and super bomby. I don't think it's 100% into the A+ range, but not really too much lower. So I'm giving this an absolute solid A. I will snap pick this and play this every single time I see it. Next up, we have Authority of the Consuls. Authority of the Consuls is a single white mana for an enchantment at rare. It says creatures your opponent's control enter the battlefield tapped. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under an opponent's control, you gain 1 life. This is not bad. It's not as good as this effect being attached to a creature. We did have, I believe, Imposing Sovereign recently-ish. I think it was like M14 maybe it was M15. But it was a 2-1 with this ability, or at least the first ability anyways. And that was much better. Being on an enchantment is not great. At only a single mana, it is a really low cost, and it will generate a pretty solid amount of value over the course of the game. I don't think it's necessarily a first pick, but I do think it's close. You still need a good deck. You still need, a solid curve and to be pretty aggressive with this. So I don't think I'm going to go higher than a B-. It doesn't really go in every deck, but it does look like a fairly solid B- to me. It's not a do-nothing enchantment like many of them are. This does something the second it comes down, the turn after it comes down, and your opponent plays a creature and it ends up tapped. I'm pretty happy to start with a B- on this. I don't think it's first pickable exactly, but I think it is still relatively solid. So B- for Authority of the Consuls. Next up is Aviary Mechanic. Aviary Mechanic is 1 and a white for a creature, Dwarf Artificer at common. It's a 2/2, and it says when Aviary Mechanic enters the battlefield, you may return another permanent you control to its owner's hand. So this is like the definition of a C+. It's a perfect bear. It's a 2/2 for 2, which is 100% filler and always includable if you need it, and cuttable if you have just better stuff. But this one has a pure upside. Not having to bounce a creature is great. Way back when there was White Mane Lion, which was this card, but you had to bounce a creature. But that card did have flash, so there was a couple of other things going on there. But you had to return a creature to your hand, and so that kind of screwed things up sometimes here or there. This, if you don't want to return a creature to your hand, you don't have to. And that's great. You get a 2/2 for 2. But there will be times where you have a creature with Fabricate or a cool Enter the Battlefield effect, and you want to bounce it to your hand to recast it, either that turn if you have the mana, or next turn. And it's going to be better than a bear. So it is a pure, prototypical C+ for Aviary Mechanic. Up next, we have Built to Last. Built to Last is a single white mana for an instant at common. It says target creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn. If it's an artifact creature, it gains indestructible until end of turn. +2/+2 for 1 is always totally fine as a combat trick, but extremely unexciting and a pretty late pick at that. The artifact clause is alright, but I don't think it really changes the grade. It's just kind of something to think about a little bit when you're deck building. The fact that if you have an artifact creature, you could give it indestructible, could save it from some varieties of removal, destruction removal, burn removal, but not -X removal. Using it as a way to attempt to punch through damage never really works out the way you want indestructible to really work. We'll talk about that in a couple of cards, actually. So I don't think this grade changes because of the artifact clause. I think it's just a fine combat trick that you'll play the first copy of if you don't have too many good cards. So seems like a solid C to me. Next up is Captured by the Consulate. It's 3 and a white for an enchantment aura at rare. Enchant creature you don't control. Enchanted creature can't attack. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, if it has a single target, change the target to this enchanted creature if able. Yeah, this is not quite pacifism. It's kind of weird. It's really weird. It's a ridiculously expensive pacifism that only stops the creature from attacking. It can still block, and then it lightly discourages your opponent from casting non-creature spells. But it can still block, and boy will it ever block. I'm sure it gets better in constructed. Maybe, I don't even know. But in limited, it just feels really weak. Getting rid of an attacker is great, but if it was a legitimate threat, it's probably going to still be one heck of a blocker. And if it has activated abilities, then oh boy, it's just going to activate those abilities. This just feels really weak to me. I love pacifism, and this is just so far from pacifism. Maybe I'm misunderstanding its power, but I'm kind of out on this card to start with. I'm going to start at a C-. I don't like the idea of turning off an attacker but keeping one heck of a blocker. Yeah, C- from me. Maybe the fact that they can't cast removal is powerful, but I don't buy it. In Limited, I just don't buy it. C- to start. I might be wrong, but I'm going to start at a C- for Captured by the Consulate. Just as a side note with Captured by the Consulate, it's the first card that has this on it. There's a little story spotlight at the bottom. This has no effect on the strategy or anything like that, but it's just a really cool feature that I really like. Magic has pushed forward with really getting the story through in the card art and in the flavor text of cards, and now they've gone even farther, and on the cards that are really, really important to the story, they've actually added a story spotlight along with a link to mtgstory.com, which will take you to the latest storyline for the current set. So this Storylight Spotlight 2 out of 5 shows that this is the second story card, and if you put them in order, you kind of get to piece together the story. So at this point in the story, Pia Nalar is being taken away by the Consulate after briefly seeing Chandra and etc. So if you do want to read more about that, go to mtgstory.com. Their fiction has been getting just better and better and better, and I'm really happy to see this just blatant link to players who may not otherwise know about the story to get more people into it. Next up is Cataclysmic Gearhulk. This is 3 white for an artifact creature construct at Mythic. It's a 4/5. It has vigilance, and it says when Cataclysmic Gearhulk enters the battlefield, each player chooses an artifact, a creature, an enchantment, and a planeswalker from among the non-land permanents he or she controls, then sacrifices the rest. Note that is the rest of the non-land permanents. Their lands do stick around. This is the first in the Gearhulk cycle. There's one for each color, and boy, are some of them just absolutely ridiculous. This is one of the lesser ridiculous ones, minus the fact that it's a 4/5 vigilance for 5, which is pretty decent right there. This isn't Tragic Arrogance, which is really kind of one of the big slaps against it. Your opponent's going to choose their best creatures. Note the plural, because of course they can choose a creature and an artifact creature, just like you are going to. Your Gearhulk will be your artifact choice, and then hopefully you choose a solid creature as well. But if you're not already getting through with that good creature, it's likely because your opponent has a good creature that they're going to choose as well. And so you're going to simplify the board a little bit, but your best creature is still going to smack up against their best creature. The hope here, of course, is that you get to keep 2, Gearhulk and a creature, and they only get to keep 1. But that's not always going to be the case. It's still going to be fine. I just don't think this is as broken as some of the other Gearhulks that we'll see a little bit later. I think I might sometimes pass this up for truly premium removal, but I do think it is still pretty solid. I'm willing to still give it a B, because I think you will a decent number of times be able to get the 2 creatures while your opponent only gets 1. But there's going to be absolutely a non-zero amount of time where your opponent keeps 2 decent creatures and you keep 2 decent creatures, and nothing really changes. So I'm going to go with a B on it. I think I will pass it for premium removal sometimes, but really this is just an advertisement for how excited I am for some of the other Gearhulks coming up later in the week. Next up is Consulate Surveillance. Consulate Surveillance is 3 and a white for an enchantment at uncommon. When Consulate Surveillance enters the battlefield, you get energy, also known as 4 energy counters. You may pay 2 energy to prevent all damage that would be dealt to you this turn by a source of your choice. Meh. It's 4 energy for 4 mana, which is alright, but the effect just isn't that great. It's not even fog, because it's only a single source that you're preventing damage from, and your opponent is well aware that this effect is there and exists, so it's not like you're going to surprise them by using it. I think there's just way better ways to get energy than a 4 mana, basically do-nothing enchantment. I'm out on this. I'm going to leave it in the sideboard. I'm not going to take it very highly. Straight up D for me for Consulate Surveillance. Next up is Consul Shieldguard. Consul Shieldguard is 3 and a white for a creature dwarf soldier at uncommon. It's a 3/4, and it says when Consul Shieldguard enters the battlefield, you get 2 2 energy. When Consul Shield Guard attacks, you may pay 1 energy. If you do, another target attacking creature gains indestructible until end of turn. A 3/4 for 4 is alright, kind of 23rd card potential. You'll play it if you need to. Getting a couple of energy off it is also pretty nice, and that kind of bumps it to, I don't know, like 22nd card. The attacking clause is fine. It's a potentially nice way to try to force through some damage, but I feel like a lot of the time you're just going to kind of be saddened when your indestructible creature just bounces off of something bigger, because rarely would you be giving your giant awesome creature indestructible, because usually it can just get through. Now maybe if you're in like a board stall, that'll help out a little bit, I guess. Indestructible is kind of an interesting keyword that I think a lot of people really kind of salivate over, but it just never really ends up being worth it. Unless it's sort of like, surprise, it has indestructible, and this is not even slightly a surprise that it will have indestructible. If we think back to Nahiri's Machinations, which gave indestructible to a creature every single attacking step, you didn't even have to pay energy for it, and that was still miserable. It was unplayable. This at least we get a body, and we get some energy with it. So I think it's still totally fine 23rd card potential, even as I said, maybe like 22nd card potential, but I'm not really willing to go too high on this to start. I think everything about it sounds good, and it just won't quite get there. So I'm going to go with a solid C. I think it's cuttable or playable if you want, but that's where I'm going to start on it. Up next is Eddytrail Hawk. Eddytrail Hawk is 1 and a white for a creature bird at common. It's a 1/2. It has flying. It's a bird, and birds have flying. When Eddytrail Hawk enters the battlefield, you get 2 energy, like many other cards in this set. Whenever Eddytrail Hawk attacks, you may pay 1 energy. If you do, another target attacking creature gains flying until end of turn. I like this so much more than Consul Shield Guard. Getting flying to an attacking creature is infinitely better than giving an attacking creature indestructible. The 1/2 body isn't the best, but at 2 mana, we can't really ask for more than that, plus getting the 2 energy on top of it seems like a really great deal. I think this will be surprisingly good to some people who may just kind of be like, oh, it's a 1/2 flyer, whatever. I think it's going to actually be pretty good. I think it seems like an absolutely solid C+ to me. It's obviously not a bomb in any way, shape, or form, but I think I'd probably be happy to play this in most of my white decks. So I'm going to start at a C+ on this. I could even be argued into a B- on it. I think it's going to be quite solid, especially for aggressive strategies. So C+ for Eddytrail Hawk. Up next is Fairgrounds Warden. Fairgrounds Warden is 2 and a white for a creature dwarf soldier at uncommon. It's a 1/3, and it says when Fairgrounds Warden enters the battlefield, exile target creature an opponent controls until Fairgrounds Warden leaves the battlefield. This is awesome. Fiend Hunter was almost exactly this card, except it was 1 white, and you could kind of abuse its wording because you could flicker it before the effect happened, and the first exiled creature would be permanently exiled. It required a lot of setup, and honestly didn't super come to fruition in Limited too much. It did in Standard, and I definitely got pretty close to winning an entire GPT on the back of an Infinite Fiend Hunter combo deck. But this is the fixed version. You can't do that. You are going to exile one single thing as long as this is on the battlefield. But this is easier to cast because it's 2 and a white as opposed to 1 white, and it has the same 1/3 body. Virtually in all cases, this is going to be just a way easier to cast and splash, and that's a really important part. Fiend Hunter. This card should be a pretty solid first pick a fair bit of the time, and I will be gladly drafting as many of these as I can get my hands on. It's obviously not a bomb, but it's pretty darn good. I'm very happy to give this a B+. I'm going to draft so many of these so long as other people aren't being greedy and taking them out of the packs from me. B+ for Fairgrounds Warden. Up next is Fragmentize. Fragmentize is a single white mana for a sorcery at common. Destroy target artifact or enchantment with converted mana cost 4 or less. This will be tricky to rate without truly playing the format. It doesn't kill Gearhulks, so really it kills the non-creature artifacts and maybe some of the vehicles. It doesn't kill the biggest of threats. If artifacts are threatening enough, at 4 mana or less, then this could be main deckable as kind of a C, maybe a C+. But otherwise, this will be sideboard only. This will almost definitely have targets. There are 50 artifacts in this set. People are going to be playing a good number of them. This will have targets. The question is, are those targets worth playing this card? Is it worth spending a card slot to blow up one of those artifacts? And that's really going to require playing the format. I'm going to start this at kind of a split grade, D+, if there just aren't amazing targets, and C if there are targets worthwhile. But this is really going to require playing the format, so not an exact grade on Fragmentize just yet. Up next is Fumigate. Fumigate is 3 white for a sorcery at rare. It says destroy all creatures. You gain 1 life for each creature destroyed this way. Sweepers are never quite as good in limited as they are in constructed, but they are a great release valve if you're facing some pressure. Just make sure that you are playing with it in mind and don't play out your entire hand, or it won't end up being much more than a fog if you can't follow it up by reestablishing your board. At 5 mana, this is pretty nicely costed. That's almost as low as we've seen a sweeper in quite some time, since the Day of Judgment era where it was 2 white. So this is pretty nicely costed and probably a first pick in most cases. It's not quite bomby enough though, so it's not going to reach the A range for me, but I will happily put it at a B+. So Fumigate, B+. Gearshift Ace is up next at 1 and a white mana for a creature dwarf pilot, uncommon. It's a 2/1. It has first strike, and it says whenever Gearshift Ace crews a vehicle, that vehicle gains first strike until end of turn. A 2/1 for 2 with first strike is quite nice. It kills basically everything you'll ever see at 2 mana while surviving. I'm in on that with just that. It's a solid C+ right then and there. Now, if you do have some vehicles, giving those vehicles first strike could be huge, especially given how high power, low toughness some of them seem to be. I'm thinking, of course, of the 5/1 trample one that is out there. Giving that first strike? Oh boy, that's going to be awesome. I think that this definitely starts as a C+ at an absolute minimum with 0 vehicles in your deck, and it only goes up from there. The ceiling is not going to be massive. It's not going to be like an A- if you have a bunch of vehicles, but it will still probably hit like a B, B-. But at a base, I'm starting at a C+ on Gearshift Ace. I will put this in every white deck I ever play, basically. Next up is Glint Sleeve Artisan. Glint Sleeve Artisan is 2 and a white for a creature dwarf artificer at common. It's a 2/2 with Fabricate 1. So it's a 3/3 for 3 or a 2/2 for 3 with a 1/1 buddy. Both are totally fine, and this should be a mid-pack pick that you probably always play. You'll never cut it, and you'll never really be excited to see it. Kind of a pure definition of a C. Herald of the Fair is up next. It's a 2 and a white creature human with no class whatsoever. It's just a human. Common, it's a 3/2, and it says when Herald of the Fair enters the battlefield, target creature you control gains +1/+1 until end of turn. It seems fine, like a pretty perfect C. It's a 3 mana 3/2 that pumps your 2-drop on curve, which is nice. Otherwise, it pumps itself for no value, or maybe later in the game pumps a flyer or something good like that. It's not exciting. It's very much like the Spirit that we just recently had, the 2/2 bear that pumped for a turn. You're not going to go out of your way to play these, but you'll probably play the first one always, and the second one maybe. So it's kind of like a pretty perfect C. You're going to pick these late mid-pack, and you're never going to write home about how amazing it was, but you're going to be happy to have it here and there. Next up is Impeccable Timing. Impeccable Timing is 1 and a white for an instant at common. Impeccable Timing deals 3 damage to target attacking or blocking creature. Seems pretty decent to me. It functions almost like a puncturing light, but even better in that it kills X3s, but also facilitates trades with bigger creatures rather than being totally uncastable like a puncturing light was. I'd expect this to be a relatively high pick, kind of piece of removal for white. It's not exactly premium or first pickable, but still pretty darn solid to me. I'm willing to go with a B- on this. I think the versatility of it is just pretty darn solid and way better than puncturing light ever was. So B- for Impeccable Timing. Next up is a reprint. Inspired Charge. 2 white for an instant. Creatures you control get +2, -1 until end of turn. Good old Inspired Charge. It's not good, but you will lose to it. It's at its best in either aggressive decks or really wide decks, as Trumpet Blast always is, of course. This, with a mess of servos or thopters, will just end games. That being said, you should never really take this highly, and you really need to be ready to cut it, because not every deck should play it, not by a long shot. There are decks where it is 100% correct to play this card, and there are a lot of decks where it is 100% wrong to play this card. Make sure you know which is which. Kind of on average, as far as picking, it's kind of like a C. You're not going to take it highly. You're going to take it mid to late mid pack if you want it, and you're just going to pass it all the time if you don't want it. So make sure that you do know whether or not you want it based on what deck you're in. And I'm going to go with a C on Inspired Charge. Following up Inspired Charge is Master Trinketeer. Master Trinketeer is 2 and a white for a creature, Dwarf Artificer at rare. It's a 3/2. It's spicy. It says, servos and thopters you control get +1/+1. Pay 3 and a white, create a 1/1 colorless servo artifact creature token, which of course reads create a 2/2 token, as long as you control Master Trinketeer. Definitely a build around, but not terrible kind of on its own. On its own, it is a 3/2 for 3, which is fine, but unexciting, and you can pop out 2/2s for 4 mana, which is a pretty solid ability. But if you do go even slightly deep, let alone really deep, into Fabricate and Thopters, then you are just made. This is a first pick build around. It's not exactly bomby on its own, but it will create or help create just absolutely disgusting decks. I'm happy to go with a B+ on Master Trinketeer. I really want to play with this guy in combination with Chief of the Foundry, which we'll talk about in several days when we get to the Artifacts review. But B+ for Master Trinketeer. Next up is Ninth Bridge Patrol. Ninth Bridge Patrol is 1 and a white for a creature, Dwarf Soldier at common. It's a 1/1. Whenever another creature you control leaves the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on Ninth Bridge Patrol. We've of course seen almost this card very recently with Unruly Mob, except Unruly Mob was when a creature you control dies. This will get a counter if something gets exiled, or even if something gets briefly flickered, which there is flicker in this set. So it's probably ever so slightly better than Unruly Mob, which did not fare very well in the last format. It just kind of fell totally flat. This one steps up probably not even a half grade. The narrow cases of flickering something to get a counter or exiling something to get a counter doesn't really make this any better. If you can really abuse it, if you somehow build a sack deck or things are going to be leaving the battlefield a ton, maybe it gets a little bit better, but ultimately you're playing a 1/1 for 1, and it's going to be a 1/1 for 1 for a while. It just doesn't fly for me. It's a C-. I will cut this very regularly. If I have to, I'll play it, but I don't expect seeing it very often. So C- for an Unruly Mob, C- for a Ninth Bridge Patrol. We've got another reprint. This one was in Dragons of Tarkir, or Fate Reforged, or Cons, or one of the three. Pressure Point. 1 and a white for an instant at common. Tap target creature, and also draw a card. Meh. I've never been a fan of Pressure Point. It's virtually a 1 creature fog that replaces itself, and that's just really weak. I would not play a card that said pay 2 mana, draw a card, and that's virtually what this does. I keep these in the sideboard until I feel like I maybe need them, and that's just really rare. Maybe if you're up against an aggro deck and you literally can't live one more turn and you need something, you can put this in, but that's super rare, and there's probably better ways to go about it. So D- on Pressure Point. Didn't really care for it last time I played with it. Won't really care for it this time either. Next up is Propeller Pioneer. Propeller Pioneer is 3 and a white for a creature human artificer at common. It's a 2/1. It has flying and fabricate 1. A 2/1 for 4 flyer isn't great and not really something that I'd be looking to pick up. A 3/2 flyer for 4, though, is getting a little bit better there. It doesn't tussle with other flyers very well, so it's still not going to be a high pick, but if you don't have any problems in the air, then a 3/2 is fine. Maybe at Dawngriff levels, to use an Eldritch Moon comparison, is kind of where I would pick this. It's still mid-ish pack. It's not much higher than that. The added versatility to get a servo, if you can justify just getting a 2/1 flyer and you do want to go wide, or get an artifact to crew, or get an artifact for your pseudo-metal craft that we have going on in this set that we'll see a little bit later, or for whatever reason you might want a servo, is nice, but it's not enough to really jump this above a mid to kind of late mid-pack pick. Kind of a solid C from me. I'm going to not take this very highly. I'm going to cut it sometimes, and I'm going to play it other times, and that's really all you can say for a C. So Propeller Pioneer, a C. Next up is Refurbish. Refurbish is 3 and a white for a sorcery at uncommon. Return target artifact card from your graveyard to the battlefield. This is spicy if you have the right target. Obviously, this will be at its best returning a Gearhulk or something like that for 4 mana. I would strongly discourage ever taking this highly, hoping that you get there in pack 2 or pack 3 or whatever you have left to get an amazing target. Leave it for the back end of the packs, but once you have the juicy targets, feel free to pick it up. Hitting the battlefield rather than hand is a massive bonus. That being said, this is unplayable if you don't have at least decent targets. Getting back a puzzle knot, which is something we'll talk about in a few days, is not a reason to ever play this card. Getting back a 2/2, not a reason to play this card. Getting back an 8/8 trample, that's a reason to play this card. So make sure that you do play this in appropriate decks with good targets and not in others. This is another kind of split grade. It ranges from D to a C plus, I would say, depending on target. C plus is kind of if you have a Gearhulk in your deck. Keep in mind, this is not a second copy of your Gearhulk. A lot of people will often describe it as that, but your Gearhulk must make its way to the graveyard first. Otherwise, this card is nothing, or a copy of a really crappy artifact. So do keep that in mind. Kind of a DC plus, depending on the deck. Next up is Revoke Privileges. Revoke Privileges is 2 and a white for an enchantment aura at common. Enchanted creature can't attack, block, or crew vehicles. You know how I didn't really like Captured by the Consulate because it was kind of like an overcosted, crappy pacifism? This I love. This is amazing. This is pacifism plus the creature gets its keys taken away. I'll take this every single time. It's absolutely awesome. It's 3 mana to just turn a creature off. Yeah, they can still activate abilities, I guess, but this is still pretty darn solid. I will be first picking this in a lot of packs, and I'll be taking it very rapidly. Play as many of these as you can get. Just a totally solid B+. Super awesome. Crazy that it's at common, to be honest. This is often an uncommon effect. Yeah, Revoke Privileges, super awesome. B+. Following that is Servo Exhibition. Servo Exhibition is 1 and a white for sorcery at uncommon. Create 2 1/1 colorless servo artifact creature tokens. I'm never really a big fan of Dragon Fodder in Limited, which this basically is. Dragon Fodder is 1 and a red, sorcery makes 2 goblins. Obviously this has a slight bonus if you really need your artifact count up, or if you have a Master Trinketeer, or you really need to go wide for an inspired charge or something. But beyond those specific cases, I'm out on this card. It's not something I'll be playing often. Honestly, kind of surprised it's at uncommon. I guess if it was at common, it would be way too easy to just fill your board with artifacts, but kind of surprised, and I'm going to keep this in the sideboard, I think, to start. D for me. Next up, we have Skyswirl Harrier. Skyswirl Harrier is a 4 and a white creature bird at common. It's a 3/4, it has flying, and that's the end of the story. A 3/4 flying for 5 vanilla, I mean, I'd rather not play it not without any extra abilities or something. But if I'm hurting for a win condition or a top end, then this should work in kind of desperation mode. Still, it should probably hang out towards the back half of the pack, and you should only take this if you, are in like pack 2, pack 3 and saying, hey, I can't win a game of Magic with the deck I currently have. I think this will go a C as opposed to a C-, just because unlike something like Thornhide Wolves, which sort of fills this niche of a biggish 5-drop creature, this one will end more games just by virtue of having flying. But I'm not going to go any higher than a C. This should be a back half pack, and you should cut this in a number of decks. So solid C for me. Up next is Sky Whaler's Shot. Sky Whaler's Shot is 2 and a white for an instant at uncommon. Destroy target creature with power 3 or greater, scry 1. Wow! This just seems nuts! It is strictly better Smite the Monstrous. It costs less than Smite the Monstrous, it kills more, it scries for 1 just for good measure. This seems like a really solid, really high pick. You want to kill things with 3 or more power. Smite and Humble the Brute, which was basically the same thing but it had Investigate and was more expensive, were iffy because 4 or greater isn't always going to be on the battlefield. You can very reliably end up with those cards stranded in your hand doing nothing. But 3 or greater, you are going to have targets. And they will range from being relatively unthreatening threats depending on your board state, like a 3/3. Or they could be, an 8/8 trample. And you just get to flat out kill them for 3 mana at instant speed. Plus, you get to scry for some weird reason. Man, this is a first pick. This is a hard first pick. A-. This seems like premium removal. Yeah, it doesn't hit 2 X's or 1 X's or 0 X's, but who cares? A-, Sky Whaler's Shot. Oh, this card seems so good. I suppose it's only fitting that we follow up an incredible card with a fancy decorated camel. Up next is Tasseled Dromedary, a single white mana for a creature camel. It's an 0/4, and that's the end of the story. It is a Yoked Ox. It's not playable. It's pure sideboard card. There's basically no deck that's ever going to want to play this main deck. You're going to side it in if you find yourself totally unable to live through the early game. Yeah, you're just not going to play this card. You shouldn't have been playing Yoked Ox. I know some of you did, but you shouldn't have been playing it. It just doesn't do anything. D+, just because I will side this in way more regularly than many other sideboard cards, because sometimes it turns out that I'm up against a mono red deck and I'm going to die by turn 4 if I don't have this card. But you are not going to face that the majority of the time. You shouldn't be main decking this card. Pure sideboard D+ for Tasseled Dromedary. Up next is Thriving Ibex. Thriving Ibex is 3 and a white for a creature goat at common. It's a 2/4. When Thriving Ibex enters the battlefield, you get 2 energy counters. Whenever Thriving Ibex attacks, you may pay energy, 2 energy. If you do, put a +1/+1 counter on it. This is part of a cycle, and to be honest, I'm kind of iffy about the whole cycle. I think they're fine, but really at a filler kind of 22nd, 23rd card level. I don't think they're amazing. A lot of people have thought that this card was just insane when Limited Resources reviewed it, and I think part of that was just simply them falling into a trap of thinking that Limited Resources must have gotten an amazing cycle of cards. And I just don't think this is an amazing cycle of cards. It's a 2/4 for 4, which is pretty standard, and solid 23rd card, cut it if you have anything better kind of level. Tacking on a pair of energy is solid, and being able to turn this into a 3/5 when it first attacks is all right, but no one ever went out of their way to play Siege Mastodons, and this requires work to turn it into a Siege Mastodon. At 4/6, it gets better-ish, but with no evasion, it's still really mediocre. I think really this is just a fine body attached to some nice energy. It seems fine, but really mid to late pack for me. Pure C. I'll play this sometimes and I'll cut it a bunch of the other times. It's just not that good to me. Pure C. Up next is Toolcraft Exemplar. Toolcraft Exemplar is a single white mana for a creature Dwarf Artificer at rare. It's a 1/1, which is bad usually, but there's more. At the beginning of combat, on your turn, if you control an artifact, Toolcraft Exemplar gets +2/+1 until end of turn. If you control 3 or more artifacts, it also gains first strike until end of turn. So I mean, the best case scenario here is that this attacks on turn 2 as a 3/2. That's pretty cool. Turn 3 and later, it's totally mediocre. It's every other 3/2 that you don't want to play, but you have to because you're just not going to have enough awesome cards. But it's just not great. I'm really unsure about this guy, to be honest. It feels like it requires way too much to go right for it to be great. That being said, I'd still play it as long as I have a handful of artifacts, but I'd be looking to pick this up middle of the pack. I don't think this is worth kind of like a pack one, pick one. Putting in all of this work just to get a 3/2 first strike doesn't seem that great. I'm going to start at a C+ on this. I'm ready to be wrong, but I can't imagine it being more than a B at the absolute ceiling. But I'm pretty happy to start with a C+ on this. I think it's just too much work for too little payoff. Up next is Trusty Companion. Trusty Companion is 1 and a white for a 3/2 creature hyena at uncommon. It has vigilance and it says Trusty Companion can't attack alone. This is something that you shouldn't let fool you. Can't attack alone can sound really weak, but as long as you're solidly a creature deck, it's not a huge deal. Plus having vigilance, plus being able to block alone, being a 3/2 for 2 can make this thing come out of nowhere. It's still not going to be amazing. I think a solid comparison would be Bonded Construct from Origins, which was this minus vigilance, and it was a 2/1 for 1. The upside there was that it was a really low cost to play it as a 1-drop, play a 2-drop, and on turn 3 attack with the pair. Here, you'd have to play a 1-drop, which probably wouldn't be that good, drop the companion, and then attack in, which is kind of a less ideal sequencing. Otherwise, you're not really attacking until turn 4, at which point a 3/2 doesn't become quite as good. Still, being a 3/2 vigilance for 2 means that it still is probably going to do some work. I'm going to stay a little bit high on this just because of how much Bonded Construct surprised me at times. I'm not saying it was a great card, but I am going to start on a C+ on this. I can see it dropping to a C or C-, but I'm going to start a little bit optimistic at a C+ on Trusty Companion. Following that Trusty Companion is a Visionary Augmenter. Visionary Augmenter is 2 white for a creature Dwarf Artificer at uncommon. It's a 2/1 and it has Fabricate 2. So it's a 4 mana 4/3. That hasn't really been great in recent history, thinking Nettle Swine, Summit Prowler. It's always been playable, but not exciting. I think the real story here is probably the 2/1 with 2 1/1s. That'll help you crew vehicles without using quote-unquote real creatures. It'll give you sacrificial creatures to pump up to go wide strategies, etc. Ultimately, I'm going to have to play with Fabricate. I'm going to have to play with it to get a super awesome handle on just how it works, just how often you want to go servos instead of counters. I'm betting it's probably better than I think it is on first glance, but not quite amazing. I don't think Fabricate's going to be game-breaking, and I don't think it's going to be you always choose the counters or you always choose the servos, which is awesome. That's fantastic game design. Ultimately, I think this specific card is probably going to be kind of a solid mid-pack pickup for most decks, and slightly higher if you are pushing the artifact go wide or servo theme. So I'm going to start at a C+ on Visionary Augmenter. Our final card for white, there are only 35-ish cards per color because there's so many artifacts in this set. But our final white card is Wisp Weaver Angel. Wisp Weaver Angel is 4 white for a creature angel at uncommon. It's a 4/4. It has flying, and it says when Wisp Weaver Angel enters the battlefield, you may exile another target creature you control, then return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. Ouch! So for 1 more mana than Serra Angel, we lose Vigilance, and we gain a Flicker. Not super sold on this. If the format's really slow, this could have a place, or if your deck is really built for the long game, but that 6 mana is a killer. Probably fine enough to play if you have to, unless the format's really fast, which some people are predicting it is, but I feel like everybody predicts every set to be fast. And spoiler, they're not always right. Anyways, with some good end of the battlefield effects, Fabricate, for example, or other things, I have a feeling this could be okay in some decks, but I just feel like it's going to perform way less good than you want it to. Those amazing plans you have of this flickering the best end of the battlefield effect in your deck, it's not always going to work out that way, and I have a feeling that some games at least, you're just never going to get to 6 mana. So Wispweaver Angel, I don't think it's bad, I just think it's hard to get going to where it wants to be. I'm going to start at a C+ on Wispweaver Angel. If the format turns out to be slower, then this grade's wrong, and it's going to be more like a B-, maybe even a B. But I'm going to start at a C+ for Wispweaver Angel. So that's going to wrap it up for White. A little bit of a shortish video compared to my usual first set review, because as I said, there are so many artifacts in this set. As a result, I might actually have to split the sort of miscellaneous artifact set review video into 2. I'll see how that works once I kind of get around to doing that set review. That's going to be mid next week. But hopefully you guys are enjoying these set reviews. Hopefully you guys are super excited about this set. I think it's going to be ridiculously fun. New plane, new planeswalkers, new mechanics, all new mechanics. Super excited for this. White's looking definitely interesting. The Fabricate mechanic being so heavily into it, a lot of good energy producers and energy sinks, and man, revoke privileges. That's the kind of removal that I love. So I'm super excited about White. Let me know what you're super excited about for Kaladesh in general and also for White down in the comments below. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, you can find me at Twitter at @TheManaLeak. That's LEEK like the vegetable, not the card. You can also find me at Facebook.com/TheManaLeak, Twitch.tv/TheManaLeak, and Patreon.com/TheManaLeak. If you want to help support The Mana Leak and keep it going strong, head on over to Patreon.com and donate whatever you can. I don't care if it's $1 a month or $1,000 a month. I'd prefer the $1,000 a month, but I'll take the $1 a month too. There's a couple of reward tiers up in there as well. $5 a month and $14 a month will get you various things, but definitely check that out if you do want to send some support my way. Click that like button if you like the content. Click subscribe if you want to see more. And as always, if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, let me know. Otherwise, I'll see you tomorrow for the blue set review.